You are violating the sanctity of this neighborhood, sir. You are, quite frankly, a nuisance, and if this device continues to emit these barbaric noises, I will be forced to elevate this to the highest levels of the Homeowners Association. That's where we start. Right in the middle of it. Me, Leo, standing on my perfectly manicured, aggressively average suburban lawn in upstate New York, staring down a woman who looked like she was carved entirely out of Botox and righteous indignation. Her name? Doris. But come on, nobody calls a woman who acts like that Doris. She was a Karen through and through, the kind of person who uses sanctity and nuisance in the same breathless threat. Doris, I sighed, adjusting my glasses. I hate confrontation, but I love my grandfather's clock. It's a clock. It tells time, on the hour. It's what clocks do. It's been doing it since before you moved here, when this house was still occupied by, my actual grandfather. The device she was referencing was Old Man Time. Let me tell you about Old Man Time. He's a towering 6.5-foot monolith of dark mahogany and brass. My grandfather, a retired clockmaker, brought him back from Switzerland decades ago. The chimes, Westminster specifically, are loud. Not offensively loud, but definitely a presence. When he hits noon, the vibrations actually make the spoons rattle softly in the kitchen drawer. It's a sentimental, tangible connection to a man I adored. And Old Man Time is the only thing I care about keeping loud. Karen's face, which I swear was permanently set to a filter of disappointed superiority, tightened. She had that aggressive blonde bob, the kind of haircut that seems to be a prerequisite for demanding to speak to the manager of life. The history of the piece is irrelevant, Leo, she clipped, pointing a perfectly manicured nail at my front door. The revised HOA bylaw, Trotsarnt Text 4.1, clearly stipulates that audible sound exceeding wash text 50 decibels at the property line for durations greater than 5 seconds is prohibited between the hours of Barsh text $9 a.m. and text $6 p.m. And I assure you that chiming thing exceeds the limit. I felt my eye twitch. I'm an IT guy. I deal in logic, in code, in ones and zeros. I deal with systems that either work or don't work. Karen was dealing in emotional hyperbole and weaponized civility. Doris, I measured it myself, I countered, pulling out my phone and showing her a decibel app screenshot, the kind of petty preparation only a true suburban warrior understands. It peaks at busk text /48.75 dB. It's loud, sure, but it's not illegal. It's classic. It's beautiful. It is not beautiful. It's barbaric. It sounds like a train crash made of ancient metal. I was having a Zoom call with my book club, a very important discussion about the ethics of unreliable narration, and your clock drowned out the entire discussion at text 3 p.m. 3 o'clock, Leo. That's during prime afternoon productivity. I stuffed my hands in my pockets, trying to maintain the Zen master persona. My apologies, Doris. Perhaps your book club should switch to a medium that doesn't involve audible sound. Or maybe, and here I let a tiny sarcastic smile escape, I could adjust Old Man Time to chime only in Morse code. That was the wrong thing to say. Her eyes narrowed into tiny, dangerous slits. "You think this is a joke?" she hissed. "You think you can hide behind technicalities and your deceased family's antique furniture. Let me be clear, Leo. I am formally lodging a complaint with the HOA management company, the City Council's Noise Abatement Task Force, and frankly, I'll look into public nuisance litigation if that monstrosity is still ticking next week. She turned on her heel, her designer jeans swishing with aggressive purpose, and marched back across the street to her house, which was meticulously painted in approved beige. I just stood there, watching her retreat. A sigh escaped me, but it wasn't a sigh of defeat. It was the deep, restorative breath of a man who has just been given a mission. My sarcasm had been mistaken for weakness. My quiet defense of my grandfather's legacy had been seen as an opportunity for Karen to flex her suburban dominance. I walked back inside, the front door closing quietly behind me. Old Man Time stood silently in the foyer, waiting. I put my hand on his warm mahogany case. She wants quiet, I thought, my mind already racing. She wants me to turn down the clock? No. That was giving in. That was letting the beige-clad tyranny win. My epiphany hit me with the force of 1,000 chimes. She didn't complain about the clock's volume. She complained about its noise pollution and its timing. You want to elevate this to the highest levels of the Homeowners Association, Doris? I whispered to the clock. You are about to get the loudest, most legally sound, and most perfectly synchronized public service announcement this neighborhood has ever experienced. I sat down at my laptop, ignoring the unread emails from work. I typed 2 things into Google search: grandfather clock chime trigger mechanism and industrial-grade directional PA horn price. The war had begun. And the next time Old Man Time spoke, the whole damn street was going to listen. My inner monologue was a whirlwind of technical specifications and pure, unadulterated, petty vengeance. I'm an IT professional, right? My job is taking complex legacy systems and integrating them with modern, efficient outputs. Old Man Time? He's the ultimate legacy system. Karen? She was the annoying bug I needed to patch. The grand scheme was beautiful in its simplicity and maddening in its execution. I needed a mechanism to capture the chime and broadcast it. Not just loud, but pristine. First, the components. Text. The trigger. A tiny high-sensitivity contact microphone or a miniature induction coil placed discreetly inside the clock mechanism. When the hammers strike the chime rods, I needed a clean electrical signal. A simple sound-activated switch was too messy. I needed synchronization perfection. Text. TUS. The amplifier. Something heavy-duty. Not for music, not for announcements. Just pure, uncolored, clean amplification of a distinct gong. I needed something military-grade, or maybe just really, really enthusiastic. Text. 3. The output. The PA system. It had to be directional. I didn't want to annoy Mr. Henderson, the sweet old man who just waters his petunias and never bothers anyone. I needed the sound focused like a laser beam. A directional horn, mounted inconspicuously on the roofline, perfectly angled to cover Karen's property like an auditory blanket. My online shopping spree was a nightmare. I spent 3 hours arguing with a bot about whether a text $100 watt law public address speaker was suitable for residential use. No, I'm not using this for a neighborhood bingo night, Terry, I typed, frustrated, into the live chat window. I need it for ambient sound quality assurance. It's for public time notification. Is there a volume knob or just an on-off switch? Because I need precision. Technical, precise obedience to the law. The customer service rep, Terry, eventually just sent me a link to a $500 outdoor sound cannon and suggested I consult a professional installer for neighborhood relations. That was the key. Installer. I knew the electrical wiring, the induction coils, and the signal isolation, but running cable across my roof line and setting up a weatherproof high-decibel output device with style? That required a certified professional, or at least a highly questionable one. I found Gary. His company name was Gary's Garage and Gutter Gear. His website looked like it was designed in text, $8,000, featuring a blurry photo of a pickup truck and a promise, "We fix it ugly, but we fix it right." Perfect. I called him. "Gary's Gear, what's your emergency?" The voice was a gravelly baritone, clearly smoking a cigarette while answering. "Hi, Gary. My name is Leo. I have a rather unique installation project." "Unique is what pays the bills, pal. You want a satellite dish disguised as a bird bath? Been there." "No, nothing that simple. I need to install an outdoor directional public address speaker on my roof line, disguised as something non-threatening, and it needs to be wired to a specialized microphone inside an antique piece of furniture." Silence on the other end. Total, suspicious, gravelly silence. "You talking about a nanny cam?" Gary finally asked. "'Cause I don't do domestic surveillance. I got standards." No surveillance. It's for audio output. Specifically, it's for amplifying the chime of my grandfather clock and broadcasting it across the neighborhood. Legally, of course. Another long silence. Then a low chuckle. "Kid, you got some issues. I like issues. I'll be over in 20. 20 minutes later, Gary rolled up in his '98 Dodge Ram, which looked like it had survived 3 hurricanes and one very bad relationship. Gary himself was built like a cinder block, mid-60s, with a mustache that looked like it was made of copper wire. He wore a faded shirt that read, "I don't taste test, I install." I led him inside, past the silent old man time. "That's a nice clock," Gary admitted, running a calloused hand over the mahogany. "They don't make 'em like that anymore? So you're telling me this thing, this beautiful classic piece, is the source of a neighborhood war?" "The source of a petty dispute, Gary. My neighbor Doris thinks it's barbaric noise pollution. I need your help to make it a certified public time notification service." I showed him the microphone I'd bought, a tiny piezo sensor, and the massive, ugly PA horn. "The sensor goes here, inside the case, wired through the floorboards, up to the attic, and out to this beauty," I explained, gesturing wildly between the subtle sensor and the industrial horn. "It has to be perfectly isolated to only pick up the internal chime." Gary stared at the horn, then back at the clock. He finally broke the silence with a philosophical statement. "You know, I used to just do gutters. Then folks started asking for weird stuff. Solar panels to power bird feeders, security lights that only blind teenagers. But weaponizing an antique clock? That's new. That's art." He crossed his arms, the skepticism returning. "Look, I gotta charge you top dollar. This is weird, targeted, and probably gonna get me dragged into small claims court." "How top dollar are we talking?" 10 grand, cash, for running 2 wires, mounting a speaker, and guaranteeing weatherproof installation." My jaw dropped. 10 grand? "Gary, I bought the PA system for $500. "You're not paying for the labor, kid. You're paying for the motive. You're paying for my discretion. And you're paying for the risk of getting yelled at by a woman with a hostile bob. That's a minimum $9,000 surcharge." He was serious. He was banking on my desperate need for revenge. I thought about Karen's smug face. I thought about old man Time being silenced. I thought about the sheer, magnificent hilarity of the resulting public announcement. "Fine," I said, pulling out my phone. "I can do half now, half when it chimes for the first time." Gary's copper wire mustache twitched into a genuine smile. Now that's what I call a milestone payment. You got yourself a contractor, Leo. Let's make some noise. Gary showed up the next morning at text 7:00 a.m. sharp, before Karen's yoga class started. He brought a ladder, a spool of high-gauge wire that looked like it could power a small city block, and a thermos the size of a traffic cone. I only work fast when it involves petty disputes, he grunted, hoisting the ladder against the side of my house. Adrenaline's a good motivator. The inside work was the hardest. We had to drill a tiny, almost imperceptible hole through the base of the clock's cabinet and run the piezo sensor wire cleanly underneath. I insisted on soldering the connections myself. No cheap wire nuts on this masterpiece of spiteful engineering. Leo, you're treating this wire like you're transplanting an organ, Gary remarked, leaning against the doorframe, chewing loudly on something that smelled faintly of motor oil and peppermint. It has to be clean, Gary. This signal is the voice of vengeance. It can't have noise, distortion, or the sound of the house settling. It's just a bell ringing, kid. It's an act of war, Gary. It needs audio fidelity. The real challenge was isolating the sound. The first few tests were a disaster. We were still inside the cabinet, testing the microphone placement. Clank! The little hammer hitting the chime rod. Bzzz! The amplifier was picking up the fluorescent light buzzing in the hallway. Achoo! That was me, sneezing. Woof! That was the neighbor's golden retriever, 2 houses down. See? Gary said, gesturing. It's picking up the dog. You gonna broadcast that dog all over the block? No, I insisted, adjusting the input gain on the preamp. We need to use a frequency gate. The chime rods hit a specific narrow frequency range. We filter out everything else. My sneeze, your chewing, the dog. We only let the glorious gong through. Gary just stared, mouth agape. You're building an equalizer for a dead man's clock. You are seriously unhinged, Leo. I respect that. It took 2 hours just to set the perfect filter, but eventually we got a crystal clear tap-tap-tap gong on the test speaker. It was beautiful. Next came the exterior setup. We ran the heavy-duty cable from the attic, out through a ventilation opening, and then Gary, with surprising agility for a man his size, mounted the directional PA horn. He disguised it ingeniously. It was painted the exact shade of my house trim and surrounded by some faux plastic greenery. It looked convincingly like a very large, slightly aggressive outdoor security light. It's a directional ambiance enhancement device, remember? I reminded him. Right, Gary muttered, securing the final bolts. Just needs the right aiming. He calibrated the angle with the kind of precision usually reserved for naval artillery, getting the perfect 45-degree pitch and 90-degree yaw, pointing directly at Karen's kitchen and living room. That's when Karen drove by. She wasn't just driving. She was patrolling. Slowly. Her car crept past my driveway like a submersible looking for depth charges. She didn't see me in the attic window, but she saw Gary on the ladder, adjusting the horn. Then she executed a U-turn that would have made a professional stunt driver wince, parked 2 houses down, and got out of her SUV. She wasn't carrying a phone this time. She was carrying a small, ornamental watering. A can. She's watering that plastic petunia she planted last year, Gary observed from the ladder. 2 houses away. That woman is a spy. Karen proceeded to march across 3 lawns. Not hers, mind you, but still, and stop directly across the street from my house, pretending to tend to a patch of curb weeds that were definitely not hers. She was openly staring at the PA horn. Finally, she couldn't take it. She crossed the street, marching right up to my property line. Mr. Protagonist's name. What on earth is that unlicensed broadcast equipment doing on your residence? She demanded, still holding the watering can like a weapon. I stepped out of the front door, forcing a smile that was clearly dripping with passive aggression. Doris, good morning. Oh, this is merely a component of my home's new, certified, weatherproof exterior ambiance enhancement system. Gary, still on the ladder, just nodded and shrugged, chewing his gum. Ambiance enhancement? It looks like a loudspeaker designed to address a stadium full of people, Karen sputtered. What ambiance are you enhancing? The sound of traffic? The birds? Oh, it's very specific, Doris, I said, trying to sound helpful and completely, utterly innocent. It's designed to ensure that the time, the universally agreed-upon measure of human existence, is accurately and audibly disseminated to the public. It's a public service, really. Think of it as a neighborhood town crier, but digital. You are broadcasting the time? She asked, her voice dangerously low. Yes. On the hour. Every hour. Just like old man Time has always done. Now he just has better reach. This is retaliatory. I know you're doing this because of my complaint. I'm calling the police. This has to violate something. Feel free, Doris, I said smoothly. My contractor here, Gary, has triple-checked the maximum decibel output for our specific zoning. We are well within legal limits. We are simply maximizing the clarity of the time signal. Gary jumped down from the ladder, dusting off his hands. Can confirm, he said gruffly. Legal as daylight, ma'am. Just efficient. Karen gave a horrified shriek, a very low internal sound, but terrifying nonetheless. She spun around and power walked back to her beige sanctuary, muttering about legal papers and noise abatement. I think she's going to call the cops and the HOA, Gary observed, looking at his watch. Good thing we got one more test. It was what text? 10:29 a.m. Gary plugged the final cable into the amplifier I had discreetly hidden in the attic crawl space. The half-hour chime is just 2 notes, he reminded me. Let's see if our little Godzilla subwoofer works. We stood on the front lawn, looking at the aggressive rain gutter. 10 seconds passed, and then, bong, bong. It wasn't earth-shattering. It was 2 quiet, yet perfectly amplified chimes, but the sound was clean. It was present. It confirmed the system was operational. Leo and Gary shared a look that said, we just built a petty suburban masterpiece. The wait for clutch text, 10:02 a.m. felt like a lifetime. Gary had packed up his gear, collected his first half of the absurd cash payment, and left with a promise to be ready with bail money. I was alone in my house, standing vigil over old man Time. My heart was doing a frantic little jig in my chest. This wasn't just about winning an argument. This was about the pure, unadulterated joy of technical excellence applied to a completely ridiculous emotional problem. I had taken an analog, century-old sound and made it a digital, neighborhood-wide broadcast. I kept running through the scenarios in my head. What if the volume spiked? What if the sound gate failed and it broadcast my heavy breathing? What if Karen had already called the city and they were waiting for the chime to slap me with an injunction? I pulled up the decibel app on my phone again, placing it on the window ledge, aimed outside. I checked the volume knob on the amplifier one last time. It was locked in place, exactly where text 11 dB slow, below the legal limit. Perfect. Part text 10:59 a.m. I could see Karen's house across the street. Her shutters were drawn, but I knew she was in there, probably pressed against the glass, waiting. Waiting for the clock to strike, waiting for her chance to pounce. The final seconds ticked by inside the clock. The delicate internal mechanisms whirred. Text 10:59 to 58. 10:59:59. And then it happened. The internal hammers struck the chime rods. The piezo sensor registered the vibration. The frequency gate opened, letting only the pure, resonant tone through. The sound shot up the wires, into the amplifier, and out the perfectly aimed PA horn. Bong! The sound was phenomenal. It wasn't just loud, it was present. It felt like the air itself had solidified and then delivered a clean, resonant punch. It had a deep, echoing quality, thanks to the quality amplifier, that made it sound like it was chiming from the depths of a canyon. Bong! 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 11 chimes, each one a triumphant, defiant declaration of the current time. The sound saturated the street, cutting through the usual suburban hum of air conditioners and distant lawn mowers. You didn't just hear it, you felt it vibrating in the soles of your feet. I looked at my phone's decibel meter, a clean, consistent text /48.9 dB peak. Legal. Beautifully, technically, flawlessly legal. The final chime faded, the echo traveling far down the street before dying out. A profound silence descended. A silence that was instantly shattered 5 seconds later. Rying! Rying! My landline phone, yes, I still have a landline, was ringing off the hook. I knew exactly who it was. Karen hadn't even processed the sound before launching her counterattack. I picked up the phone, taking a deep, satisfied breath. "Hello, Doris. Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice smooth and calm. "That was old man Time. He sounds robust, doesn't he? Very clear signal quality. Excellent audio fidelity." The voice that came back was high-pitched, vibrating with pure, unadulterated fury. You monster! You maniacal, childish ET troll! That was not a chime. That was a seismic event. You have weaponized sound. This is an act of war, Leo, and you are going to pay. Doris, with all due respect, I am merely broadcasting the legally permissible sound of a classic timekeeping device for the benefit of the community, I replied, leaning into my most annoying customer service voice. If you felt that was excessive, I can assure you my contractor confirmed it is 1 decibel below the limit. I don't care about your decibels. I care that my antique teacups rattled off the shelf. My poodle, Fifi, is hiding under the couch, shivering. You are deliberately harassing me. I am deliberately informing the public of the time, Doris. It's text 2 a.m. Precisely. I hung up the phone gently, letting the silence settle again. That felt good. That felt deserved. I glanced out the window. Karen's shutters were still closed, but I saw movement. And then I saw something truly wonderful. Old Mr. Henderson, 2 houses down, the man who only cared about his petunias, was standing in his driveway. He paused, looked at my house, and then, slowly, he started clapping. Just one old man, applauding the ridiculousness. It was a sign. I wasn't the bad guy. I was the agent of necessary chaos. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text from Gary. It was a notification from the local precinct app. Non-emergency complaint filed. Noise nuisance. Officer dispatched. The cops were coming. The escalation was officially underway. The police cruiser rolled up at text. 11 to 45 a.m. They didn't use the lights or the siren. This was clearly a low-priority Doris versus the world complaint. 2 officers got out. Sergeant Miller, a man whose face looked permanently tired from dealing with suburban drama, and Officer Reyes, a young woman who looked like she was actively suppressing laughter. I met them halfway up my driveway, adopting my most polite, non-suspicious, neighborly demeanor. "Gentlemen, ma'am," I greeted them, hands visible, smile serene. "Can I help you?" Sergeant Miller, mid-50s, weary eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Protagonist's name. We received a complaint about excessive noise, specifically a weaponized chime broadcasting across the neighborhood." He said the phrase, "weaponized chime," with the monotone delivery of a man who has truly seen it all. "Yes, Sergeant, I can certainly explain," I said, gesturing toward my house. "It involves my grandfather's antique clock, Old Man Time, and a bit of electrical engineering." I invited them inside, and Officer Reyes immediately spotted Old Man Time in the foyer. "Whoa, that thing is massive," she murmured. Sergeant Miller cut to the chase. "We're here about the large speaker system on your roof, Mr. Protagonist's name. The one your neighbor claims is targeted harassment." I led them into the living room, where I had spread out my evidence like a very boring yet legally airtight defense attorney. "Sergeant, I understand the optics," I conceded. "It looks like a loudspeaker, but its function is purely to disseminate a public time notification signal which originates from this clock. I took the time to review the city ordinance, pointage text 14.7b, regarding noise abatement, which states the maximum residential volume is pointage text 50 decibels at the property line. I handed him a laminated, colorful printout. It was a graph showing the sound profile of Old Man Time's chime, and, crucially, a printout from Gary's calibrated decibel meter. "My system," I explained, pointing to the graph, "is precisely calibrated to peak at pointage text 48.9 decibels, 1.1 decibels below the legal limit. I can assure you the system is technically compliant." Sergeant Miller rubbed his temples. He was dealing with a technicality, and he hated it. "Mr. Protagonist's name, compliance is one thing. Intent is another. Your neighbor alleges that you installed this device specifically to annoy her after a dispute over the clock's volume." "Sergeant, that's entirely circumstantial," I countered, pulling out my killer defense. "This clock is an antique. It's a family heirloom. It is my sentimental duty to ensure its beautiful, traditional sound is preserved and, if necessary, clarified for the entire neighborhood. The existing volume was insufficient for accurate timekeeping across the street. I simply optimized the sound delivery system. It's no different than boosting a Wi-Fi signal. If my neighbor is annoyed by the accurate passage of time, that's a personal issue, not a legal one." Officer Reyes coughed, turning away to hide a smile. Sergeant Miller shot her a look that said, "Control yourself, rookie." He looked at my data. He looked at the massive clock. He looked at the exasperated expression on my face. "Look, Mr. Protagonist's name," Miller sighed. "I don't have time for a physics lesson. The easiest way to resolve this is for you to just unplug the speaker. Then we can leave." "With all due respect, Sergeant, that would be admitting fault where none exists," I insisted, "and it would prevent me from exercising my right to publicly display and amplify my property's unique characteristics within all codified legal boundaries. I'd be happy to demonstrate the exact decibel output for you." Miller glanced at his watch. "The next chime is at noon. We can wait for that." "Perfect," I said, trying to contain my excitement. I had them. They had to witness the beautiful, terrible chime. "Can I offer you some coffee? I have a great French roast." Miller declined, but Reyes accepted, still trying not to make eye contact. We spent the next 15 minutes in awkward silence, me reading a magazine, Miller looking like he wished he was anywhere else, and Reyes sipping coffee, occasionally looking at the clock with a mixture of dread and anticipation. "So, what happens if it is over 50 decibels?" Reyes finally asked, trying to sound professional. "Then I'll be happy to adjust the output, officer," I said calmly. "But I assure you, it won't be." The clock began its internal winding. Whir, click, whir. Sergeant Miller pulled out his official department-issued decibel meter, the real deal, not my phone app. He walked to the edge of my lawn, right on the property line adjacent to Karen's. Text was 11:59:58. 11:59:59. The sound was immediate and overwhelming. Dong! Miller held the meter up. Reyes watched intently. I held my breath. Dong, dong, dong. 12 perfect booming chimes. The low resonance from Gary's subwoofer upgrade made the ground faintly vibrate. I could hear car alarms faintly chirp down the street, but only faintly. The sound was focused. The final chime rang out. Sergeant Miller looked down at the official meter. "Well?" I called out from the porch, trying not to sound too smug. He held the meter up for Reyes to see. Reyes stifled a loud gasp, then covered it with a cough. "Looks like text 49.3 decibels, Sergeant. Max peak." Miller slowly lowered the meter. He trudged back up the lawn, his movements radiating defeat. "Mr. Protagonist's name," he said, handing the meter back to Reyes. "You are technically within the limits." "I told you, Sergeant," I said, a smile finally breaking through. "Technical compliance is paramount." He stared at me, his eyes full of the existential weight of bureaucracy. "But I want you to know, sir, that you are being a massive, childish inconvenience to everyone involved. We can cite you for intent to harass, disorderly conduct, anything we can stick. You are making enemies in this community." "Sergeant, I am providing a public service by broadcasting the time, and my neighbor is complaining about a technically compliant sound delivery system," I replied, standing my ground. "If you can find a statute that prohibits a gentleman from using technology to enhance his antique heirloom, then you have a case. Otherwise, I'd appreciate it if you didn't threaten me with spurious charges." He sighed, the sound escaping him like the air from a flat tire. "Fine, but I'm filing a detailed report, and I'm listing this as an ongoing open noise dispute. If you raise that volume by a single decibel, you'll hear from me again." "Understood, Sergeant. Have a wonderful and precisely timed day." As they walked back to the cruiser, Officer Reyes gave me a quick, almost imperceptible thumbs up, which was a victory in itself. Sergeant Miller glared at me one last time, climbed in the driver's seat, and slowly drove away. The moment the car was gone, I let out a whoop of triumph. I had beaten the law. I had beaten the police. I had beaten Karen. But I knew one thing. Karen would not take this lying down. She was already plotting her next move. The chimes would continue, but the war would escalate. My victory was short-lived, or rather it was immediately met with a new, equally petty form of resistance. Karen was nothing if not persistent. The first volley arrived that same afternoon. I found a small, cheap boombox placed right near my property line, facing my house. It was playing the kind of soft, reedy, tinny spa music that is supposed to induce relaxation, but only makes me feel anxious. Waterfalls and wind chimes at a low but incessant volume. Passive-aggressive sonic warfare. I turned my PA system volume down a hair, just to be safe, and countered by simply starting my loud, roaring lawnmower in November. The second volley was a letter. An official-looking envelope arrived. I tore it open. It was a cease and desist order from a legal firm called Dewey, Cheatham and Howe, LLP. I almost laughed out loud. The letter was poorly formatted, had a pixelated logo, and the signature looked like it was written in crayon. Clearly Karen, or someone Karen hired for $5 on a questionable freelancer website. I filed it directly into the recycling bin. The third volley was the HOA complaint about the color of the PA horn. Apparently, my exterior ambiance enhancement device was not the correct shade of antique linen, as per the HOA-approved trim palette. This was her attempt to force me to remove the PA by hitting me with a daily fine for an architectural violation. She's a genius of pettiness, I'll give her that, I admitted to Gary over the phone later that evening. Yeah, but she's using blunt instruments, Gary said dismissively. You're using a scalpel. You need to upgrade the scalpel. I realized Gary was right. The sheer volume was a technical win, but it was just noise. I needed something that transcended volume. I needed a chime that wasn't just loud, but was intrusive. Something that rattled the soul and burrowed into the brain. Something that stayed just below the legal decibel limit, but had a psychologically destabilizing effect. I needed to change the chime's quality. I called my friend Sarah, a professional audio engineer who works on soundtracks for low-budget horror movies. She's an expert in sound design, the kind of person who can make a squeaky floorboard sound like the arrival of a demonic entity. So, Leo, let me get this straight, Sarah said over a video call, her headphones resting around her neck. You have a legally compliant sound system dedicated solely to annoying your neighbor, and you want me to make the sound feel illegal? Exactly. The law measures volume, Sarah. It doesn't measure resonant frequency, psychological impact, or the feeling of existential dread induced by a deep, unsettling bass tone. I want the chime to make people think, did a truck just back into my foundation, or is time simply ending? Sarah giggled. An actual evil genius giggle. Oh, that's brilliant. We can't change the fundamental tone of the chime rods, but we can process the clean signal you have. We can add a sub-harmonic synth, compress the mid-range to cut through walls better, and then add a clean sine wave low enough that it's more felt than heard. The Godzilla tuning fork effect, I exclaimed. Precisely. It will hit that resonant frequency of a residential structure. It won't be loud on a meter, but your furniture will hum. Sarah, unlike Gary, charged me a reasonable rate because she found the project an inspiring use of technology. She came over a few days later, bringing a suitcase full of obscure audio gear. We worked in the attic, rerouting the chime signal through a compact, battery-powered digital signal processor, DSP, before it hit the amplifier. The DSP was programmed with Sarah's custom Neighborhood Destroyer preset. The key is the sub-bass, Leo, Sarah explained, tapping at her laptop. It's a clean, puart-swash text 30 shrs gauge sine wave. It's barely audible, but it translates into physical vibration on most residential drywall and glass. And to make it stick, I'm hiding a tiny waterproof bass transducer, essentially a subwoofer, inside this bird feeder I bought at Walmart. We spent an hour carefully installing the transducer inside the bird feeder, which she then mounted near the PA horn. It looked innocent. It looked like the kind of place a cheerful bluebird might take a snack break. All right, the true test, Sarah said, checking her watch. It's texts $330. Just a half-hour chime, but let's feel that bass. We retreated to the kitchen, waiting for the 30-minute mark. Text 3:29 to 58's, 3:29:59, bong, bong. The two chimes were perfectly amplified. But this time, something was different. I felt a subtle thump in my chest cavity. The cabinets in the kitchen gave a quick, low vibration, like a very polite, miniature earthquake. I glanced at a glass of water on the counter. The surface rippled slightly. Sarah grinned. "That's called text 30 Herschel's daughters, baby. It's the sound of the house itself confirming the time." From across the street, we heard a distant, high-pitched, feminine scream. It wasn't the sound of anger. It was the sound of psychological distress. "I think your neighbor just felt the chime, Leo," Sarah remarked, packing up her expensive gear. "She won't complain about the volume because the volume is the same. She'll complain that her house is now speaking in tongues." "Mission accomplished," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. Karen's next move was going to be the final one. I could feel it. She wasn't dealing with a simple, noisy clock anymore. She was dealing with an audiophile's obsession with legally mandated harassment. Karen was cornered. Her attempts to use the law, cops, bureaucracy, HOA color complaints, and cheap intimidation, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, had all failed spectacularly. All she had left was a final, desperate act of social superiority. The climax arrived on a Saturday afternoon in mid-June. Karen was hosting her annual summer solstice garden mixer. I could tell it was a big deal. White tents were erected in the backyard, caterers were setting up buffet tables, and I saw a dozen or so expensive-looking cars parked up and down the street. It was Karen's moment to show the neighborhood how successful and sophisticated she was. I knew exactly when the clock would strike. Text 6 p.m. Prime cocktail hour. The time when toasts are made and neighbors are judged. I spent the morning watching the preparations, my anticipation building to a fever pitch. I walked up to the attic, checking the system one last time. I made sure the DSP was fully charged, the amp was humming quietly, and the PA horn was still aimed with surgical precision. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party, light jazz, polite laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Karen was probably holding court, delivering a perfectly rehearsed speech about the importance of community and the quality of her locally sourced artisan cheese. I checked my watch. Text 58 p.m. 2 minutes to 0 hour. I could hear the distinct sound of a microphone feeding back slightly from Karen's backyard. They were getting ready for a toast. Text 5:59 to 58. 5:59:59. The small internal chime began, and then the PA system took over. Boom! The sound wasn't just loud, it was physically disruptive. The sub-bass hit first, a low tectonic rumble that resonated through the ground, vibrating the glasses on my countertop, and I guarantee shaking the $5,000 appetizers off Karen's table. Boom, boom, boom. 12 chimes. The Westminster melody, usually so stately, was transformed into an apocalyptic, majestic gong. It cut through the light jazz like a sonic laser beam, drowning out everything. For 15 seconds, the only sound in the entire neighborhood was the powerful, legally compliant time notification. The sound ended abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute. I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Then, the mic from Karen's backyard squealed, followed by a choked, hysterical gasp. I told you he would do this!" And then I heard footsteps. Not running, but a frantic, aggressive sprint. I looked out my window. Karen was coming. She wasn't walking or marching. She was full-on charging across the street, her beautiful floral dress flying, her expression a mask of pure, unbridled rage. And she was holding the one weapon she had left, a small, silver gardening trowel. She stormed up to the side of my house, stopped directly under the PA horn, the aggressive rain gutter, and started frantically swinging the trowel at it. Clang! Scrape! She was literally attacking the structure. "You will not win, Leo! You will not silence me!" she shrieked, not even realizing the irony of her demand for silence. Suddenly, a voice boomed from across the street. It was Mr. Henderson. The Petunia Man. "Hit it with the pointy end, Doris! Go for the wires! Aim for the subwoofer!" he yelled, cheering her on from his driveway like a wrestling fan. This intervention, and the sheer visual absurdity of a woman in an expensive dress attacking a faux rain gutter with a trowel, was too much for the party guests. Two mortified-looking men in suits rushed across the street and physically pulled Karen away, one taking the trowel. "Doris, stop it! You're making a scene!" one man hissed, dragging her back. "He's destroying our lives! He's using the sound of time to torture us!" she screamed, being dragged back to the safety of her white tent. I stood by my window, watching the chaos subside. The party was effectively over. Everyone was looking around, embarrassed, checking their glasses for water ripples, and looking at my house, not with annoyance, but with sheer disbelief. I knew I had won. It wasn't the sound that defeated her. It was the fact that she had lost control in front of her peers. The final chime had broken her spirit. 10 minutes later, as the remaining guests were awkwardly packing up, a car slowly pulled up to Karen's curb. A man in a very sharp blazer got out, a realtor, and started talking to her husband. I went back inside, letting the silence settle. I poured myself a drink and waited. At our text, $700 p.m., my doorbell rang. It was the realtor. He looked haggard. "Mr. Protagonist's name, I'm Ron. I'm listing the house across the street. Mrs. Doris's last name asked me to drop this off." He handed me a flyer. It was a glossy, professional, full-color listing for her house. I opened it. Under the beautiful picture of her beige, silent sanctuary, the text read, 4-bed, 3-bath, prestigious home, motivated seller, highly desirable street, price negotiable. And in small handwritten text at the bottom, Karen had scribbled a personal note. "The noise is now your problem, Leo. Enjoy your clock." I smiled. "Thank you, Ron. Tell her I appreciate the timely notification." Karen, Doris, was gone within 3 weeks. It was a surprisingly swift exodus. I watched them load her immaculate, beige-approved furniture into a moving van, and she never once looked in the direction of my house. The silence she left behind was almost deafening, but only for a day. 2 weeks after that, a U-Haul arrived. A young couple moved in, Maya and Ben. They looked mid-20s, dressed in comfortable clothes, and their first order of business was unloading a massive drum kit. I had a feeling things were going to be different. The clock chimed at text, $3 p.m. Old Man Time delivering his majestic, resonant, slightly terrifying tone thanks to the PA system and the hidden subwoofer. I saw Ben jump slightly, then look up at my disguised rain gutter. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed. I walked across the street to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, extending a hand. "I'm Leo, your neighbor. I just wanted to give you a heads up about the clock." Ben shook my hand, grinning. "Oh, the realtor mentioned it. Said it was a local tradition and a sound with a lot of character." "I'm Ben, and that's Maya. We're musicians." "Well, you heard it. It's loud, and it's on the hour, every hour. Ben nodded, putting down a cymbal case. Yeah, I heard. The fidelity is actually insane. Is that horn directed at our house? With surgical precision, I admitted, lowering my voice conspiratorially. My previous neighbor Doris had some issues with the barbaric noise pollution. We had to make some technical adjustments to ensure its continued legal operation. Ben's eyes widened. Wait, you engineered a legally compliant sound system specifically to win a neighborhood feud? That's legendary. No wonder the last people moved out so fast. It was expensive, I confessed, but the joy of winning was priceless. Ben laughed, a genuine hearty sound that sounded a lot better than spa music. Well, I'm a drummer. We're loud anyway. I think your clock is a great piece of neighborhood character. Nice low-end response on that chime, by the way. What kind of transducer is that? We spent the next half hour talking about audio gear, not property lines. He understood. He got it. I kept the PA system and the subwoofer. Old Man Time continues to speak on the hour, every hour, delivering his perfect, low-frequency pronouncement of the time. Now, it's not an instrument of war. It's just a massive, incredibly clear neighborhood clock. Looking back, the entire thing cost me a small fortune, brought the police to my door, and caused a woman to attack my house with gardening equipment. But the money spent was the best money I have ever invested. Because sometimes you don't fight fire with water. You fight it with a perfectly engineered, legally resonant, and booming Westminster chime. Bong! It's time!